A. Allen, 1954 Vision. The Invasion of America, the Daughter of Babylon. In this latest installment of the Daughter of Babylon series, we will examine a 1954 vision by A. Allen, a Pentecostal preacher who had this vision in 1954 about the destruction of America. What most people do not realize is that America's destruction has been foretold going back to the beginning of this country by many people. So, Christians, and for that matter, all of America, should not be surprised about the coming destruction of the greatest nation on earth. In fact, Americans should be ready for it and prepared to leave this country, yet instead they are fast asleep and only concerned about what sports team is winning this week. Below is the complete prophecy of Allen that he received from the Lord in 1954. 1954 Vision of A. Allen, The Invasion of America. As I stood atop the Empire State Building, I could see the Statue of Liberty, illuminating the gateway to the New World. Here, spread before me like an animated map, is an area maybe 80 miles in diameter. I was amazed that the Spirit of the Lord should so move me, there atop the Empire State Building. Why should I feel such a surge of His Spirit and power there? Suddenly I heard the voice of the Lord. It was as clear and as distinct as a voice could be. It seemed to come from the very midst of the giant telescope. But when I looked at the telescope, I knew it hadn't come from there, but directly from heaven. The voice said, "The eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth, to show Himself strong in behalf of them whose heart is perfect toward Him. Herein you have done foolishly. Therefore, from henceforth, you shall have wars." Immediately when I heard the voice of God, I knew this was a quotation of Scripture. But never before had a thing come to me so forcibly by the power of the Spirit. The ticking of the telescope stopped. The man before me had used up his dime's worth. As he stepped away, I knew that I was next. As I stepped to the telescope and dropped in my dime, immediately the ticking started again. This ticking was an automatic clock which would allow me to use the telescope for a definitely limited time only. As I swung the telescope to the north, suddenly the Spirit of God came upon me in a way that I had never thought of before. Seemingly in the Spirit I was entirely caught away. I knew that the telescope itself had nothing to do with the distance which I was suddenly enabled to see, for I seemed to see things far beyond the range of the telescope, even on a bright clear day. It was simply that God had chosen this time to reveal these things to me, for as I looked through the telescope, it was not Manhattan Island that I saw, but a far larger view. That morning, much of the view was impaired by fog. But suddenly as the Spirit of the Lord came upon me, the fog seemed to clear, until it seemed that I could see for thousands of miles. But that which I was looking upon was not Manhattan Island, it was all of the North American continent spread out before me as a map is spread upon a table. It was not the East River and the Hudson River that I saw on either side, but the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans. And instead of the Statue of Liberty standing there in the bay on her small island, I saw her standing far out in the Gulf of Mexico. She was between me and the United States. I suddenly realized that the telescope had nothing to do with what I was seeing, but that it was a vision coming directly from God. And to prove this to myself, I took my eyes away from the telescope, so that I was no longer looking through the lens, but the same scene remained before me. There, clear and distinct, lay all the North American continent, with all its great cities. To the north lay the Great Lakes. Far to the northeast was New York City. I could see Seattle and Portland far to the northwest. Down the west coast, there were San Francisco and Los Angeles. Closer in the foreground, there lay New Orleans, at the center of the Gulf Coast area. I could see the great towering ranges of the Rocky Mountains, and trace with my eye the Continental Divide. All this and more, I could see spread out before me as a great map upon a table. And as I looked, suddenly from the sky I saw a giant hand reach down. That gigantic hand was reaching out toward the Statue of Liberty. In a moment her gleaming torch was torn from her hand, and in it instead was placed a cup. And I saw protruding from that great cup a giant sword, shining as if a great light had been turned upon its glistening edge. Never before had I seen such a sharp, glistening, dangerous sword. It seemed to threaten all the world. As the great cup was placed in the hand of the Statue of Liberty, I heard these words, "Thus saith the Lord of hosts, drink ye and be drunken, spew and fall, and rise no more, because of the sword which I will send." As I heard these words, I recognized them as a quotation from Jeremiah 25 verse 7. I was amazed to hear the Statue of Liberty speak out in reply, "I will not drink." Then as the voice of the thunder, I heard again the voice of the Lord, saying, "Thus saith the Lord of hosts, why ye shall certainly drink." Jeremiah 25 verse 28. Then suddenly the giant hand forced the cup to the lips of the Statue of Liberty, and she became powerless to defend herself. The mighty hand of God forced her to drink every drop from the cup. As she drank the bitter dregs, these were the words that I heard, "Should you be utterly unpunished? You shall not be unpunished, for I will call for a sword upon all the inhabitants of the earth, saith the Lord of hosts." Jeremiah 25 verse 29. When the cup was withdrawn from the lips of the Statue of Liberty, I noticed the sword was missing from the cup, which could mean but one thing. The contents of the cup had been completely consumed. I knew that the sword merely typified war, death, and destruction, which is no doubt on the way. Then as one drunken on too much wine, I saw the Statue of Liberty become unsteady on her feet and begin to stagger, and to lose her balance. I saw her splashing in the gulf, trying to regain her balance. I saw her stagger again, and fall to her knees. As I saw her desperate attempts to regain her balance, and rise to her feet again, my heart was moved as never before with compassion for her struggles. But as she staggered there in the gulf, once again I heard these words, "Ye shall drink and be drunken, and spew, and fall, and rise no more because of the sword that I shall send among you." As I watched, I wondered if the Statue of Liberty would ever be able to regain her feet, if she would ever stand again. And as I watched, it seemed that with all her power she struggled to rise, and finally staggered to her feet again, and stood there swaying drunkenly. I felt sure that at any moment she would fall again, possibly never to rise. I seemed overwhelmed with a desire to reach out my hand to keep her head above water, for I knew that if she ever fell again she would drown there in the gulf. Then as I watched, another amazing thing was taking place. Far to the northwest, just out over Alaska, a huge, black cloud was arising. As it rose, it was as black as night. It seemed to be in the shape of a man's head. As it continued to arise, I observed two light spots in the black cloud. It rose further, and a gaping hole appeared. I could see that the black cloud was taking the shape of a skull, for now the huge, white, gaping mouth was plainly visible. Finally the head was complete. Then the shoulders began to appear, and on either side long, black arms. It seemed that what I saw was the entire North American continent, spread out like a map upon a table, with this terrible skeleton-formed cloud arising from behind the table. It rose steadily until the form was visible down to the waist. At the waist, the skeleton seemed to bend towards the United States, stretching forth a hand toward the east and one toward the west, one toward New York and one toward Seattle. As the awful form stretched forward, I could see that the entire attention seemed to be focused upon the USA, overlooking Canada at least for the time being. As I saw the horrible black cloud in the form of a skeleton bending towards America, bending from the waist over, reaching down toward Chicago and out towards both coasts, I knew its one interest was to destroy the multitudes. As I watched in horror, the great black cloud stopped just above the Great Lakes region and turned its face towards New York City. Then out of the horrible, great gaping mouth began to appear wisps of white vapor which looked like smoke, as a cigarette smoker would blow puffs of smoke from his mouth. These whitish vapors were being blown toward New York City. The smoke began to spread until it had covered all the eastern part of the United States. Then the skeleton turned to the west, and out of the horrible mouth and nostrils came another great puff of white smoke. This time it was blown in the direction of the west coast. In a few moments' time, the entire west coast and Los Angeles area was covered with its vapors. Then towards the center came a third great puff. As I watched, St. Louis and Kansas City were enveloped in its white vapors. Then on it came towards New Orleans. Then on they swept until they reached the Statue of Liberty, where she stood staggering drunkenly in the blue waters of the Gulf. As the white vapors began to spread around the head of the statue, she took in but one gasping breath, and then began to cough as though to rid her lungs of the horrible vapors she had inhaled. One could readily discern by the coughing that those white vapors had seared her lungs. What were these white vapors? Could they signify bacteriological warfare or nerve gas that could destroy multitudes of people in a few moments' time? Then I heard the voice of God, as he spoke again, Behold, the Lord maketh the earth empty, and maketh it waste, and turneth it upside down, and scattereth abroad the inhabitants thereof. And it shall be, as with the people, so with the priest, as with the servant, so with his master, as with the buyer, so with the seller, as with the taker of usury, so with the giver of usury to him. The land shall be utterly emptied, and utterly spoiled, for the Lord has spoken this word. The earth mourneth and faddeth away, the world languisheth and faddeth away, the haughty people of the earth do languish. The earth also is defiled under the inhabitants thereof, because they have transgressed the laws, changed the ordinance, broken the everlasting covenant. Therefore has the curse devoured the earth, and they that dwell therein are desolate, therefore the inhabitants of the earth are burned, and few men are left. Isaiah 24 verse 1-6. As I watched, the coughing grew worse. It sounded like a person was about to cough out his lungs. The statue was moaning and groaning. She was in mortal agony. The pain must have been terrific, as again and again she tried to clear her lungs of those horrible white vapors. I watched her there in the gulf, as she staggered, clutching her lungs and her breast with her hands. Then she fell to her knees. In a moment, she gave one final cough, and made a last desperate effort to rise from her knees, and then fell face forward into the waters of the gulf and lay still as death. Tears ran down my face as I realized that she was dead. Only the lapping of the waves, splashing over her body, which was partly under the water, and partly out of water, broke the silence. A fire consumes before them, and behind them a flame burns. The land is like the Garden of Eden before them, but a desolate wilderness behind them, and nothing at all escapes them. Joel 2 verse 3. Suddenly the silence was shattered by the screaming of sirens. The sirens seemed to scream, "Run for your lives." Never before had I heard such shrill, screaming sirens. They seemed to be everywhere, to the north, south, the east and the west. There seemed to be multitudes of sirens. And as I looked, I saw people everywhere running. But it seemed none of them ran more than a few paces, and then they fell. And even as I had seen the statue struggling to regain her poise and balance, and finally falling to die on her face, I now saw millions of people falling in the streets, on the sidewalks, struggling. I heard their screams for mercy and help. I heard their horrible coughing as though their lungs had been seared with fire. I heard the moanings and groanings of the doomed and the dying. As I watched, a few finally reached shelters, and above the moaning and groanings, I heard these words, "A noise shall come even to the ends of the earth, for the Lord has a controversy with the nations. He will plead with all flesh, he will give them that are wicked to the sword. Behold, evil shall go forth from nation to nation, and a great whirlwind shall be raised up from the coasts of the earth. And the slain of the Lord shall be at that day from one end of the earth even unto the other end of the earth, they shall not be lamented, neither gathered nor buried, they shall be dung upon the ground." Jeremiah 25 verse 31-33. Then suddenly I saw from the Atlantic and from the Pacific, and out of the Gulf, rocket-like objects that seemed to come up like fish leaping out of the water. High into the air they leaped, each headed in a different direction, but everyone towards the U.S. On the ground, the siren screamed louder. And up from the ground I saw similar rockets begin to ascend. To me, these appeared to be interceptor rockets, although they arose from different points all over the U.S. However, none of them seemed to be successful in intercepting the rockets that had risen from the ocean on every side. These rockets finally reached their maximum height, slowly turned over, and fell back toward the earth in defeat. Then suddenly, the rockets which had leaped out of the ocean like fish all exploded at once. The explosion was ear-splitting. The next thing which I saw was a huge ball of fire. The only thing I have ever seen which resembled the thing I saw in my vision was the picture of the explosion of the H-bomb in the South Pacific. In my vision, it was so real I seemed to feel a searing heat from it. As the vision spread before my eyes, and I viewed the widespread desolation brought about by the terrific explosions, I could not help thinking, while the defenders of our nation have quibbled over what means of defense to use, and neglected the only true means of defense, faith and dependence upon the true and living God, the thing which she greatly feared has come unto her. How true it has proven that unless the Lord guards the city, the watchman keeps awake in vain. Psalm 127. Then as the noise of the battle subsided, to my ears came this quotation from Joel, the 2nd chapter, Blow ye the trumpet in Zion, and sound an alarm in my holy mountain, let all the inhabitants of the land tremble, for the day of the Lord cometh, for it is nigh at hand, a day of darkness and of gloominess, a day of clouds and of thick darkness, as the morning spread upon the mountains, a great people and a strong, there hath not been ever the like, neither shall be any more after it, even to the years of many generations. 1. This is a very sobering prophecy that most Americans will ignore. But they should not ignore this warning, as I believe from available evidence that includes Russia's threats over the past few years to destroy America with nuclear weapons, to the sudden massive influx of military-age males across the U.S. southern border, we are very near the end and should be paying careful attention. Throughout this vision, Allen observes a white vapor that envelopes the country. What could this be? It certainly is not biological warfare, as that is at the microscopic level and cannot be seen with the naked eye. It could be chemical weapons, but to cover the entire US, it would have to be a massive amount of chemicals. But what if that smoke is a cover for something else entirely, or maybe even a signal to Jews and Christians that it is time to leave America? Have we seen anything like this recently? We sure have, with the fires in Canada and the western United States. The smoke has been wafting down into the US and is almost pure white and covers Michigan and now New York City. Western US fires have seen the smoke move eastward across the US, causing sun blockouts and serious respiratory problems. This grayish smoke fulfills Allen's vision. Though these fires started over a month ago, they are still burning because of the remoteness of the point of origin of the fire. Firefighters can't get to them, so they are letting them burn out. The smoke continues as of today, August 11, 2026, to waft over the eastern and mid-US. Allen in his prophecy described this as white vapor, and to those right now suffering under the air quality warnings in the East Seaboard area and Midwest, that is exactly how they are being described. Back in 2023 we saw the same thing, with the air blanketed with gray smoke. The air being blanketed included Minneapolis, Chicago, Indianapolis, Atlanta, and Pittsburgh. This is according to an ABC article that is dated June 29, 2023. The article also states that all of Wisconsin was covered in this white smoke, as was Michigan. 2. This is exactly the vision that Allen had in 1954. So, we may be just a few seconds to midnight and on our way to destruction. Allen also saw this white vapor coming from Alaska as well. As you may have heard, there are wildfires in Alaska presently and in 2023 too. According to the University of Alaska at Fairbanks, their Alaska Interagency Coordination Center is tracked over 149 fires throughout Alaska in 2023. With that many fires, you can bet that Alaska and parts of Canada are seeing the same white vapor that is being seen in the eastern and Midwest United States. 3. This coincides with the vision that A. Allen had in 1954. The end of America is not coming, it is here, and I suggest that Americans seriously consider leaving the United States now if they can. You may not get out if you wait too much longer. Now what about the missile sightings that Allen saw in his vision? Numerous people have claimed to see Russian ballistic missile submarines off both coasts of the United States. Michael Peterson of the Russian Maritime Studies Institute told Newsweek that there are indications that Russian ballistic submarines have been deploying off the coast of the United States. He further stated that the U.S. is seeing cruise missile threats currently that reflect what the U.S. saw during the height of the Cold War. 4. This admission by a professional from the Naval War College dovetails with Allen's prophecy of observing the missiles incoming from the Atlantic and Pacific, though the article does not say if these observations are also occurring in the Gulf of Mexico. Conclusions. This vision by a pastor from the 1950s is clearly coming to pass with the evidence that we are seeing nationwide on the North American continent. Now more than ever we should be praying to God that we can escape all these things. Thank you for watching. Like, subscribe, and comment below. William K. Zabel.